Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Ben Stewart Podcast. Today, we have Ian Morris as our guest. I came to know of him through Paul Check, and Paul, he comes up in just about every single podcast of ours, really close friend. And another close friend, Jason, connected me finally while I was on this last road trip to Austin with Ian, and we just had an incredible conversation. He's doing great things with music, but hear this out. He's a multi-instrumentalist, a poet, an artist, an author, and an intuitive healer. So he has over 21 years of experience in the performing arts field and produces an album each month based upon current astrology. He works with healing frequencies, and he has a unique business model which he uses to share his music. I'm super excited to get into this one. We have a lot of incredible territory to roam around in this, so make sure to ask your questions. This is live, and let's get straight to it on the Ben Stewart Podcast. All right, we are back. Ian, how are you doing, my man?
I'm doing great, man. I really appreciate you having me on the show. I'm excited to be here.
This is going to be a good one. We got Gordo over here. You only just recently met him, but he'll be pushing buttons and hopefully in more ways than one. We like to keep it loose and conversational And yeah, man, super cool. For me, I've been a musician my entire life. I've often said that I'm a musician trapped in a filmmaker's body. And really, the main thing that I love about filmmaking is soundtrack. If you go back to some of my first few films, I did 100% of the soundtrack. Nowadays, mainly because of time constraints and also some better music through Storyblocks and audio blocks. I don't do all the music, but that actually saddens me. I really like using more well thought through music, and I just came to finally listen to the lexicon that you sent me. You emailed me, and incredible stuff. Really happy to hear the kinds of tones that you're using, and the from what we've talked about in how you approach music. I'm just super interested to just dive in and I guess to get us going. What was it that got you engaged in music in the first place, and how did that transition itself to where you're at today?
Yeah. Well, it definitely was my father. My dad was a musician, and I was just really, really fortunate that I was exposed to so much different styles of music pretty early on. So I grew up listening to everything from the Beatles and Zeppelin and Frank Zappa to
Nice.
like Tower of Power and Steely Dan and Little Feat and, music like that. And then he got into folk and, Appalachian music and just reggae, just anything. He had like, I think it was 2,500 vinyl records, like when we were growing up. And I remember my mom was telling me a story, and she said they got married when they were 18 and they had this like tight budget. And she was saying that she would, budget out their money, and they would have lunch money, and they would, they were, young and growing into themselves. And she said he would save his money for like weeks and not eat lunch, and then go to the record store and buy a whole bunch of records, and I just remember laughing and thinking like, that's how much music meant to him, that he would go without eating to just fill his ears with that other substance. And so it was just so cool being exposed to that music, because it really expanded my awareness for just the all-encompassing effect that music can have in so many different situations and occasions, and just how the styles of music were, just like different tastes of food. And so that really was like the first, exposure. And then it just kept growing. As I got older, I started playing music. Guitar and bass were the first instruments. And then I went into, keyboard and piano and things like that, and got into a lot of world music instruments like the Yuchin and the pipa and a bunch of, Chinese instruments, and just started really expanding, started off playing rock and roll and punk rock and, metal stuff, and then grew into cover bands and got into trip hop and hip hop and beat making. And so it just kept, as I was, growing up and maturing in age, my perspectives on the music I was playing grew pretty dramatically. But what brought me to the point where I am right now was I ran a nonprofit called Homemade Genius. And when I was running that nonprofit, we were working with a lot of underserved children in the community. And I watched how music was changing their personalities, their demeanor, their energy. And I started looking at music differently from that point. I started seeing it as more than entertainment. It was more of a tool of release and a tool of healing. And then a few years later, I found myself in a health crisis and started, hearing the doctors say stuff about MS and colon cancer, and ultimately was diagnosed with that. And so it was a real time of conflict where I was really, I was a musician, I was uninsured, I didn't have health insurance to pay for some of the procedures they were wanting to do. And so it was really just a spiritual moment of, making that decision, like, okay, I'm going to dive into breath work, healing, meditation, and sound healing. And just really make a go of it, because there wasn't really another option. And so, about 11, 12 years later, here I am doing the same things that helped me in my own healing and sharing that with other people around the world. And it's just such a big blessing.
Damn, dude. So when we talked right before we went live, you were just telling us about, you living on the East Coast, and I was asking you where you lived, and you'd mentioned that you went up to Burlington, Vermont to take care of your mother, who was diagnosed with cancer at that point. And so this would have been after your diagnosis?
Yeah. Mine was 2011, 2012. My mom's was 2015 and 16. And so I ended up moving up there in 2016. So it was just a few years after me helping myself to, move past that issue with myself. And so I was able to kind of have a template or a game plan in working with her. And it just was something that really paid off for both of us. It was something where I could reconnect with my mom in a different way and share some of the things that I learned. And when I was there, she was kind of sharing things that I feel like we didn't get to connect with when I was younger. And so it was just kind of a circle of life there.
Dude, I love that. And, going back to what you said about your dad, he would forego eating to nourish a different part of himself, like his soul. Like it's so interesting how, we talk about evolution in such mechanistic terms, and we talk about it, our ancient ancestors, it was all about calorie conservation. And sure, like I know a lot of it was, I absolutely know that. But it is interesting how you see it's either the really good parents or the spiritual aspirants that forego eating for a higher cause. It's really interesting to hear. And also, like, that bled through into you, that love for music, and I'm sure also with your mom. And with you, it seemed like it was also a leap of faith. Like you had to really drill down into your knowing. Like it seems like, if I can paraphrase what I heard, I don't want to go the traditional route with all these procedures that they're talking about. That seems more like a last resort, or at least a third or fourth resort. Maybe we could try something that's less invasive as a first resort. And I'm curious, how you would respond to that, and then also what you would say about what you felt clicked with your mom. What kind of real shift that you felt in her? What did she have to like root into in order for herself to find herself on the healing path?
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting is anytime I've been on a podcast or an interview, some of the first questions that people ask is like, how did I get here? And then what would I say is the first building block for like moving forward? And when my mom and I were talking, I was sharing with her that I feel like the first thing I had to do for myself was decide that I wanted it to be different. And then the second thing was to actually apply in a very minuscule way, because like if you jump in too far, too fast, you just get overwhelmed. And I think that it makes it feel hopeless and people give up really easily. But if you make it to where it's something that you're striving for each day I remember listening to an interview with Will Smith where he says, you just get up and try to be a better version of yourself. There's no competition with anyone else. It's just be better than you were yesterday for this next day moving forward. And that really always stuck with me, because I felt like that was something that I was always doing when I was younger, was comparing and looking where everyone else was and judging myself on that. And as you get older and mature, you figure out that we're all unique and we all have different gifts and different speeds that we're going through life. And we all have different generational baggage that's attached to us, right? and so, we are all going at different speeds. And I started having these conversations with my mom, and it was interesting because some of the things that I felt like I grew up with, I was learning through her that it was things that my dad had been going through. And I think, my dad passed away when I was 24. And I think that I wasn't able to have these conversations with him. And so having these later conversations with my mother, it helped me to realize like, it's okay to be a unique individual and to go at different speeds. And it's okay if I'm not matching up with what everyone else is doing. And I also started taking notice that when I was looking around here in the last, 7 to 10 years, the things that I felt like I was moving so slow in, when I would get over the hump, I would have friends reaching out to me saying like, man, I wish I was like you. I wish I was doing this, and I wish I had the time to do this. And, and it's like, it was things that I was doing that I felt were so against or in opposition with what everyone else was doing. But when I got through to the other side, it was much different perspective for myself, but it also was people reaching out saying, I wish I could be more like you. And I felt like I was saying, I wish I could be more like them. So when I let go of all that, I think that's when I started having that, eureka moment where I was like, my time, my speed, my unique mission, in life. And I think that in my mom's conversations, that's what we had conversations, was like how Morgan Freeman started acting at 44 and Georgia O'Keeffe started painting when she was in her 60s. And, I was sharing with her, like, what is your mission? What are you wanting to live for? Because once you decide that, that is going to squash this cancer, because you're going to have such a passion for what you're wanting to move forward, in life, for this mission, that it's going to trump, every other worry or fear that's in your life. You're going to have this desire to achieve that goal, and it's going to shift the perspective of your cellular body. And so that's one of the things that I think is like, it's the mind shift, but then it's moving forward in that minuscule, unique mission and just getting better than you were the day before,
Who was it that told you that? Was it your doctor?
No. I think it was Will Smith. I don't remember, but I'm almost positive it was Will Smith that said that.
I was going to say, it doesn't sound like a doctor.
Yeah.
Just follow your passion, and I swear it'll trump everything else that's going on in your body. And I believe it. I feel it. Even looking at where science is headed. Selin Atasoy, who Imperial College London, I think another university in the Czech Republic or maybe in Germany, did this brain imaging, and it's a different kind of brain imaging that shows the different frequencies of brain regions that light up. And she applied the Lapland equation to it to find that it follows the same equation as like thermal heat diffusion, fracturing in, like, let's say desert sand, or lightning spotting on leopards, and applied it to the brain and realized that the brain seems to behave more like a symphony than it does a calculator, far more like a symphony than it does a calculator. It's not there doing math equations all the time. It can do that, but it strives for resonance between different brain regions. And then she said, in the very near future, expect to start seeing vibrational healing modalities specified for individuals. And so as I see on your website, it says Sound Alchemist, and that feels like it's just driving at the same exact point, where we're talking about beings of frequency. We're talking about how at the fundamental level, everything vibrates. And just to speak a little bit on my fundamental belief that your body and your mind, when they come together in those moments of absolute bliss, when time seems to disappear, when you're in a flow state, when you're in love, there's a moment where I believe your mind and your soul become, or your mind and your body become one, because that's when the soul is speaking loudest. You're actually following a path. And when your body is in disarray, it seems like there's this kind of discord or disharmony, which again, we're talking in terms of frequency and vibration. So I would love to know, for you, as you got deeper into music, when did frequency and the specificity of the kinds of frequencies that you're working with now, how did that emerge?
Yeah. Well, when I was healing and going through that journey, one of the first books I found was The Healing Power of Sound by Dr. Mitchell Gaynor. That book I was actually reading in tandem with Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Life. And when I was reading those books, both of them just really spoke to me in a real cellular, deep level. And so I started exploring frequency. I was already a musician. I play about 25, 26 different instruments. I love all kinds of genres of music. So I was already kind of had a palette where I could kind of have this diversity, but I was listening to a lot of the frequency music that was out there, and I just wasn't resonating because most of it was like really, in my, please forgive me, but in my opinion, just like very cheesy, like spa music. And it was just meditation music. And so I had seen some DJs like create some like frequency based stuff, but it was like a song here or there. No one was really doing it as a full album. And so I started exploring that. And one of the things that I noticed is that out on YouTube and different places like Spotify, there was frequency music, but there was no transparency about really what was going into the creation of that music, who the creators were. And then I started thinking about a lot of the other side of that coin of like the different mind control that's involved in a lot of the industry of film and sound, like music, and just kind of the ways that the psychology of human behavior has been studied to a degree where they know, they being the elusive they, but that group of people that are, social engineering, know what frequencies to embed in film and music so that they can have the right reactions and actions out of people. So I really started diving deep and getting more cautious of what I was filling my ears and eyes with, and started really getting more exploratory on a personal and a musician level of trying to develop what I wanted to hear out there but was not hearing. And through that journey, I started realizing things like I loved binaural beats, but after a while, binaural beats started losing their effectiveness towards me. And so I started really exploring that. And what I found for myself and for a lot of the clients I started working with here in the last 12 years was that the volume of the tones that you're using and embedding in that, the amplitude has a great effect. There's people that have very sensitive ears and are very audio sensitive. And then there's people who are musicians or people who listen to music, or they are just very active and they're not sensitive to audio and they need more, stimulation. And so based on where a person is, there's different things as far as tempo, beats per minute, for instance, versus the amplitude of those tones and the background music that's being infused. And so I started exploring creating people's own custom binaural beats, and having them fill out a form and learning more about them, asking them the types of music that they like, so that you could create a custom piece of music that was a binaural beat, and then be able to evolve over a year period of working with them where you could create very specific targeted focus and really create big breakthroughs in people's lives because you're working with them one-on-one on that level. And so as that developed, you started, I got into creating the monthly events with the sound healing. And like we were talking about the other day on the phone, I said I started off with singing bowls, tuning forks, didgeridoos, and gongs. And about every 3 to 4 events, people were the turnover rate was about 3 or 4 events. And so I started asking some of my friends saying, hey, you're not going to offend me. I just want to know the truth. Like, why is it that you quit coming to the events? And they said, well, after you hear a singing bowl a few times, it's pretty much the same thing. And so I listened and received what they were saying, and I got it because, a singing bowl or a didgeridoo, different instruments, it's not that they don't have harmonic undertones or, other very beautiful frequency coming from that, but it's one note essentially, and it pretty much stays within that realm. And it's like the handpan is a beautiful instrument, but it's stuck to that, the scale that it's in. But you have like a guitar or a piano, or, you know, something that has far, far more diversity. And then you start exploring other genres of music, like taking these frequencies into trip hop and hip hop and folk and reggae and dub, and, you know, so you get into a far more expansive palette to work with people, and not just in meditation or in the yoga mat, like shavasana or something, but like getting into walking the dog, cleaning the house, doing yoga, lifting weights, working out. And so you start developing the ideas of what Listening to Smile is today, which is trying to create a release work and healing soundtrack for a person's life, using frequency-based music.
Explain that just so the audience understands. You said Listening to Smile, but explain that.
Okay. Well, yeah, so I'm the founder of Listening to Smile, and it's just a company that focuses on creative licensing for holistic practitioners. We're working with about 9 different countries right now, everything from hypnotherapists and life coaches to yoga instructors and massage and energy-based workers in that realm. And so we've created music that has the focus of the collective energy, and creating an album that's in line with the astrology energy for each month. And then based off of what's coming up for that month, we use planetary frequencies, chakra-based frequencies, body organ frequencies, and then the solfeggio and the Schumann resonance frequencies. And so we're basically pulling from that palette and creating a new album, different genres, different tempos, different styles for each month. So as people are coming to these events or using these in their sessions, every month there's new music, different styles, different focus, and it just keeps it fresh for people so that they can keep working with frequency on a daily and weekly basis without getting bored.
What is your schedule like, man? Like, making an album a month is quite an undertaking. And, you know, at some point, I'm sure, can really test the edges and the limits of staying creative month by month, but also meeting a formula in there. Now you're working with frequencies, astrologically based within the body, like you said, the chakra systems, different harmonics for each organ, which I've heard of, and organ regeneration. And then you, every single month, you're tailoring it. What exactly is, take us through your creative process. Like, how do you not reach some kind of burnout or like what do they call that, writer's block?
Yeah, well, much like you, I love film. I always tell people that film is like this amazing palette or canvas where you're bringing together like literature and poetry, music, and then visuals, you know, and it's like probably one of the most effective forms of communication I feel on the planet today. And so I think it's why documentaries are so amazing, because it's bringing so much information in creative ways, and it helps people to remember and store that in their brain. And I think that's why there's such a conscious awakening, social awakening that's taking place, is through film and media that is focused on that, with those 3 things being delivered in such a powerful and effective way. And so for myself, reading books like Wilhelm Reich and Buckminster Fuller and Tesla, and just, you know, and then I got into like Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza and all those guys in the thought movement, and I got into like the Master Key System and Florence Scovel Shinn and all these like masterminds in creating you know, just manifestations. And so I wanted my music to embody those values. And so I started really consciously getting into meditation every month before I create the album. And I would go into a meditation and really kind of tap into like Hafez and Rumi and all of these, you know, ascended masters, I'll call them, that had such an effect on me consciously. And really try to put those ideals and philosophies into the music. And I did that through the creative naming of the songs and the albums and the artwork. And to answer your point, I have a really creative team of artists people that help a lot with the astrology. I have, we're just talking with a Vedic astrologer who's going to come in and start adding some of the Vedic, philosophies and principles to, our routine and regimen to create these albums and make it more diverse. And so I listen to a lot of them, and I take a lot of the perspectives. I go into meditation, and then I, just basically unleash my creative force. It's something that in the beginning, I had conversations with friends where I would say, there's times that I would be in tears, like, why did I say I was going to do this? This is insane, right? and then there was other times in the beginning where I was like, is anyone listening to this? This is so much work, and I can't, find the audience, because it was like having to really educate the audience, because some of the first things that would come up is the upbeat or mid-tempo music. People would say, well, this isn't meditation music. And I would start laughing, and I'd say, you're right. It's frequency music. It's meant for movement meditation, And so it was like, it took a little time, but as it started connecting, we started getting emails in from people that were using it to heal, and everything from like seeing breakthroughs with autism and anxiety and restlessness and sleep, to people saying that they started listening to our music, and a year later that they were making changes in their life that helped them overcome cancer or different, life-threatening illnesses. And so you start seeing the responsibility and the reverence that starts taking place in this communication between the content creators and the listeners, who are really holding on to this and connecting with it in a way that's far greater than anything that would be entertainment based, And so it was something that over time, this is the 6th year that I've been doing this, and I can pretty much create on demand poetry, visual artwork, and music. And it's something that I don't really think that much about. Like my friend Roth, who's a DJ, he came and hung out with me for a day, and he's like, dude, you wrote like 8 songs today. And I said, yeah. And he's like, dude, it would take me like 6 months to do that. And so I was explaining to him like how this changes when you write. And I was telling him, if you listen to some of the poets who say they would force themselves to write every day, that within a year to 2 years, they were creating things that they never thought possible, writing volumes and volumes of poetry. And I was telling him that it's like a switch that gets flipped, in your brain, and you start looking at things, and everything becomes input for that creation. And instead of being overwhelmed by it, it just becomes second nature. And it's something that is just very, very powerful. So it was a blessing in the end for me, and it was something that was very humbling. But in the beginning, it felt like a curse, and it was very heavy and overwhelming to start this journey, for sure.
And Ian, something that stood out for me that I'm curious about is, it seems like there is this there was a paradigm of what meditation music should sound like that already existed somewhat in the industry, and that kind of needs to be, not that there's anything against that, but it seems like you are bringing a new style to what meditation music can be. And I guess my question is, do you feel like that, not only with your impact and what you've seen, but talking to other fellow sort of creators within music, do you see a new wave of kind of meditation creators and people approaching frequency music? Or do you feel like you're still more on the pioneering front, and it's still the mainstream sort of meditation vibe is still the same? How do you kind of see that evolution occurring?
So the biggest, there's two answers to this. So the first side, that the first answer would be yes, there are more meditation creators that I think are pushing the bounds of reality for what meditation music is and should be. And I think the second side of that is that a lot of musicians really struggle on getting their music out there. And so like the last 3 years, we had music on Spotify, and we just pulled pretty much everything off of there except one album. And I think we had it was like close to 400,000 streams on there in the last 2 years for that platform. And, over 4 years, I think we made under $1,000 off of, Spotify. And so there's just not a support there for the artists. And I'll say this, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that the average employee at Spotify is making over $100,000 a year. And I don't mean like upper management or, the hierarchy. I'm saying like the average employee is making over $100,000, but they're telling artists that they can't pay them for the platform that those artists have built, because that platform will be nothing without the musicians. And so I've seen this a lot. I've seen it in meditation apps. Like you look at Insight Timer, and when Insight Timer started, we were on there and they were very supportive of all the people on that platform. And as they grew, they started lessening the eyes that the lower, beginner, middle echelon of that app had. And they started taking on people like Deepak Chopra and a lot of these people who already had the world's attention and larger platforms to operate on, and started focusing on that. And so a lot of there's so much content on Insight Timer that people just get lost. And I've heard that it's overwhelming for the listeners. And also a lot of the musicians jumped ship because they were not being supported there. And I think this is kind of a common thread. You saw it at SoundCloud, you see it at Bandcamp. It's a common thing that happens. And I understand, like, people want to grow their platforms and I want people to have success, but at some point there has to be a synergistic building between the listeners and the people who are promoting that music, as well as the content creators. And so the platform that we've created with Listening to Smile, I bring in guest musicians, we pay them up front. We also give them a cut on things that sell after that they've created. And then we also promote them to our community and say, if you're looking for music from someone, here's a great person to work with. And we give their website, their email address, their contact information, so that they can build contacts within our community. And I guess what I'm trying to say with that answer is that a lot of musicians struggle to get their music out there. And so one of the things that I wanted to do for myself was to create value around my music outside of the traditional music industry. So I created my catalog, and I exclusively started licensing it to a member network that I built myself, so that I could put the value on the music and then create a license that was between me and those individuals or companies that was a direct line. And the focus of that relationship was to say, we want to have integrity with what we're doing with our music. We want it to be used in these ways. We would love to add value to what you guys are doing, as well as multiple revenue streams to your business or practice. But we would also like you to support us and to tell other people, like, this is a way that you can have license for this music. You're supporting directly the musicians who are creating it, and you can tell people and feel good about it the same way people feel good about doing good things for the environment. You're creating a support system for musicians and a outlet for them to be able to push this music that they spend time on, and for it to be utilized, a win-win for each person. And from that network, that win-win situation that we've tried to create, there has been this integrity, and we call it gratitude payment. So we've created a multi-use license where someone can take our music and use it in commercials, social media. They can use it in sessions, online events, and they can resell the music to their clients. And then every time they make a sale of our program, of the music, any of that, we call it gratitude payments, and we give them kickbacks. They make 40% of anything that they sell, whether it's the program or the music. And from that, those gratitude payments, it's literally taken over advertising. Like, we do absolutely no advertising. We're in 9 different countries. And because people love the music and love sharing it, it's created this opportunity where it creates those instigations of relationships. And it's just been so monumental. And the reason I'm bringing that up is to say, I feel like this is the new normal, the new paradigm of what musicians have to do, taking control of their catalogs,
Right.
abandoning the systems that are not supporting them, and then creating their own relationships with companies, situations, nonprofits, individuals, and creating their own memberships where they can have an absolute value. And the one thing I'll say to close this out is I remember an interview with Garth Brooks, and Garth Brooks was saying that I think he negotiated at the time in the 90s, he was making $7.50 an album sale, which if you remember, like TLC, I think they were getting 7 cents a record. Yeah. So like when you see that, you know, what he did, he said, I don't care if I sell less albums. I'm being supported in my craft and my living, you know, for being able to take control of his catalog that way. And I think to this day, Garth Brooks still doesn't have his music on Spotify. So it's really interesting. People will say that, you know, these types of people are money hungry or too involved in capitalism. But for me, I think that if you're not supported in what you're doing in your mission, you're unable to give 110%, 150% towards that mission. And I think that we have to be more actively involved as musicians in the business side and to take control and to start moving it into the directions that we want to go.
Definitely.
It's really interesting. You know, I remember seeing this interview with Prince, and you know, the whole thing about him turning his name into a symbol was actually had to do with the record labels and them owning your likeness and owning your name and the way that it's used. I remember that when I was in Hyrosonic, the same thing was happening. And to keep on that point, he did this interview where he was trying to negotiate well with them. He was actually trying to like communicate with them like humans and say like, listen, I write all this music, and what you're asking for is not something that I forget what percentage it was, but it was just ridiculous that he was arguing for. And the point that he made was like, you know, so I write all the music, and I for them, I even produce it myself, and I would get it all the way to the point where all they have to do is distribute it, and they want ownership of all the masters. And he was like, Federal Express doesn't even do that. Like UPS doesn't do that. You know, like they'll ship your item, but they don't say that they own it. Mm-hmm. And there's something about the music industry that's like, I understand they built something big, but they in that construction of what they've built, they've lost that core element of what it was that allowed them to even get to that point. And what I'm hearing with what you're saying, and correct me if I'm not putting this in the right way, is the type of licensing that you've created is something akin maybe to the Creative Commons, like the spectrum of Creative Commons. Like you can use this this video or this image in this kind of a creation, or you can put this, like, I forget what some of the different tiers are, but like you can use this in anything, but if you make money off of it, or if it's a commercial thing, you need to put attribution to it. I know that's probably not the exact same thing because we're talking film and music, but is that what you're saying? It's closer to open source music without going all the way to that?
It's what it is it's almost like a private membership program. And as long as you're a member, there's a diverse, option on the ways that you can utilize it. And pretty much every way that you can utilize it is a way to monetize it. And so one of the things that we started having conversations with was practitioners. In the first year, I started asking a lot of my friends who are massage therapists, yoga teachers. I said, what your music needs, what would that be? And they would say, oh, I wish I could play it, but I refer people to Spotify, but I don't really get anything for that. So if I could sell the music and make something, a lot of the teachers would say that they liked having playlists that were frequency, and that there wasn't that much frequency stuff on Spotify, that a lot of it was kind of similar. And there was nothing really super upbeat. It was all kirtan or just tonal based music. And so they were saying that they really wanted to have things that were like movement based, that were frequency. And I heard a lot of teachers say that they would have like top 40 energetic songs, but that when you listen to the lyrics, even though the music was uplifting or pumping and got people moving, when you listen to what they were saying in the lyrics, it was just very negative. And so that was one of the things that we did, was we created a lot of instrumental music, so it could be used for film or behind things, that it could be used in commercials or social media posts, as well as events, and they could, guided meditations and all of that stuff. But then we also brought in like guest vocalists that would do like positive affirmations or more conscious based lyrics on like pop music, and bringing in hip hop that was more conscious based. And so, I would say our catalog, there's about 700 songs right now in our catalog, and each month we're growing, more. And out of that 700 songs, there's probably about 60 songs that have lyrics. And so a lot of it is instrumental, so that it can be utilized in different ways. But yeah, it's basically a private membership program that gives you a very diverse way to monetize it and to recoup the expenses that you put into the music licensing. And I'll say this, when we were in Pittsburgh working at Carnegie Mellon, one of the yoga studios there, the woman had 6 yoga studios, and she came to one of the events and brought a paper that was from BMI, where she was getting sued for, I think it was $150,000. And she had 6 yoga studios with over 50 teachers that were using Spotify playlists, and they had no licensing. And so she was like, why is this happening? And I said, mainly because you have 6 yoga studios, and they want to make an example out of you, and they know that they have a chance of getting money from you, but the yoga teachers don't have that money to go after. And so they're going to make an example out of you, because there's very few ways that the record industry, the music industry, is able to make money, because YouTube, Spotify, all these streaming services have just decimated the industry. And I'll say this, the biggest thing that I do not understand, and maybe you guys might have a different insight on this, but if I'm a record label and I have all the contracts to the artist, why am I not saying, hey, we're not putting your music out on iTunes, and we're not putting your music out on Spotify, but we're creating our own, MCA, Sony record streaming platform, and we're going to put you on there. And so people say, well, because they have to start from scratch, but these guys have the money to do it. And if they have the contracts of the artist, they could take that power back in, a year, 2 years. They would have all the artists under their umbrellas again, because I have no idea why even if the record industry was like in the backwoods and they let the tech platforms steal that from them, they could take it back in a matter of a year or two. But I don't understand the logic of constantly giving away the farm, because you own all the contracts with these artists. Like, you literally are in control of how that goes. And I just think there's a need for a complete, cleaning of the entire model of the industry, from the tech side to the record, the record companies, but I think it starts with the artist saying hell no and like moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing to say about that, which is just as much of a guess, is the homogeneity of companies. Like, there's this illusion that there's a bunch of companies out there,
right?
But if you really look at it, at the top, it really is that pyramid. The same thing goes for any industry that has been around quite a while, music being one of them. And
I'm actually curious quickly on this, Ian, your thoughts on, are you familiar with Tune FM? Do you like what they're doing over there? I mean, this is the new big hot thing that a lot of artists are trying to talk about. It's using the Hedera hash graph. Beyonce's on there and all, but it seems like in general, a lot of artists are exactly in the same sentiment of you. Like, they're waking up to how much the industry is exploiting artists when you look at the contracts. And I mean, first off, just are you familiar with Tune? What are your thoughts on that? And do you think this is similar to what you're doing and moving in the right direction?
So I am familiar with Tune. I don't know the exact specifics about everything that they're offering on the platform, but what I do know is a lot of the new platforms are still making it a little sweeter. but it's still very much rooted in that old and energy. And the one thing I was going to talk about was Ben and I were talking about AI and how Google and Spotify were actually working on taking the whole catalog from the Beatles, running it through the AI, and then changing just the chord progressions here and there, where they were able to create similar music and have it licensed, and royalty free. And this is kind of what I think the new model is for these industries, is they're going to try to cut out musicians entirely from the process, and they're going to start making money from doing soundtracks themselves with these AI, music creators,
AI artists,
and artists, and it's really scary, because what's really funny is when you think about music, a lot of the coolness factor or the trend factor. I was just talking about this the other day about the Beatles. Like I've seriously, in lifetimes, I don't think there'll be another band that affects the world the way the Beatles did. And it wasn't just the music, it was their look, it was the sense of humor they had, it was the way they connected and the way they joked with the camera. They were very personable and funny. And so they had this look that was just so different from everything that was going on at that time. And it was the embodiment of their personalities that really captivated the world. And so when you think about that and you start trying to detach the human side of music, it's very scary. One of the other things I'll say is I had a conversation with a person and I asked them, they were saying they love Spotify and the playlist. And I said, I understand. And I said, just for giggles, do you know any of the bands that's on that playlist that you just brought up? And they were like, oh no, I don't. And so I was telling them, I said, this is what Spotify has been doing for the last 7 years, is they've created this playlist based listening, where the listeners just like listen for a mood or a focus, and then the bands are completely removed. And so this was step one in this process of separating the listeners from the musicians. And I think that that's what we're trying to do at Listening to Smile, is to really dive deep into deep listening skills, again, with the listeners, and helping them to listen to music in a different way, experience it in a different way, and to really captivate the audience by sharing as much as possible, and to let them behind the curtain and to have transparency where they can connect with the music, almost in a sense of like VH1 behind the music, where they're connecting with us and connecting with the process and the intention and the focus, so that they can get really connected with the music again and be on a level that is really starting to leave this art, and so that's one of the things we're trying to do.
So in the chat, we have Tune US Wellness, or I'm not sure if that's Tuneus Wellness, asked, could we play his music in YouTube videos without copyright claims?
As far as like a person, there's videos out on YouTube, and that all of that is out there. The same thing with like the Spotify. But what we're asking is that if you're in a commercial business, that you have a license from us to be able to utilize that music. And in that partnership, what we're offering is then being able to resell our music and make money from it, being able to utilize monthly albums that come out just for the membership program, that are unique, meaning that they're not available on any streaming platform. You would be the only person utilizing that music, and then you'd be able to use it in your videos, sessions, working with people one-on-one, and then being able to sell the program that we're working with, as well as the music, and then hosting monthly events based around the music, whether that's online or in person. And so it creates multiple revenue streams in that partnership and that agreement, that arrangement.
That's cool. Do you have any clients, or let's say memberships, that are doing consistent content and like consistently moving through your catalog, like using new music all the time, other than yoga studios? And I definitely want to get into what are the categories of clients or members, I guess I would say. But before that, the idea about, are there consistent content creators that are using a lot of your catalog? And also, is the whole catalog touched by you? Like, is it all your music?
Yeah, most of the catalog is my music, but I bring in guest musicians. So about Every month or every other month, I have guest musicians that come in. And then also I think the biggest compliment one of my friends gave me a couple months ago was, he said, I love how you have such a unique style with your music that when you make something that's hip hop or trip hop, I know it's you, but it sounds like that genre. And he says, then I'll hear a folk song or hear you play guitar. And he says, when you play guitar, I know it's you playing the guitar, but I can know it's you, even though it's in different genres and it sounds like those genres. And he's a musician, and I really respect him as a musician. And to hear him say that was a really big compliment that I took, and was like, wow, that's really cool to think about. But I think as a musician, if I wasn't doing what I'm doing, it would be so strange for me, because I love so much different music that I would feel so trapped, like playing in a band, creating the same music over and over again. So I feel like for me, this diversity has been really fun and expansive, to be able to do that. And once I've done this, I don't know that I could go back to just playing in a band, because it's so different. But I guess what I'm trying to say is there's different people using this music, and having that diverse catalog helps a lot. Like, we just signed up Cliff Bar Company. I'm working with like celebrity chef Pete Evans in Australia. Like, he's using it for his platform. He's created a network called the Evolve TV, and it's to kind of be something similar to Gaia, but more food-based.
My content's on there. Right? I did a film with Pete.
Okay.
The Magic Plant. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And so just those types of outlets are really using the content in different ways and very diverse ways. And then there's people who are using it like a hypnotherapist or a life coach, who are creating custom content for their individual clients, and having that diverse of catalog gives them something new to pull from all the time. So I think it really works for a lot of the people who are using music, like guided meditation, or film, or commercials, or web content in major ways. But now we're starting to see more individuals saying, so these albums aren't available except for this program. And then I'll say, yes, that's correct. And then they're saying, hey, I want to sign up to use this personally. So we're starting to see more and more people that are coming just to sign up because they want to get the albums and have the astrology. I should touch on that real quick, is when people sign up, they get an email each month, and it has the music, but it also has all the frequency information for each track, why we named it, the specific name, the focus and intention of the track, and then even the history. Like, if the name had something to do with yoga, it'll go into the history of that. And so they have this huge behind the scenes for each track, and then the frequency information, but they also have all the astrology events for the month in that, so that they can schedule events or work with clients and have all that information, like a follow the bouncing ball, to work with that music. So a lot more people are starting to sign up now as individuals just to have that, and to have the music that they can't get anywhere else.
I dig that. We got Jeffrey Cummins asking, do you use personal mantra and voice created sound medicine? So do you use voice with this outside of English, like mantra, as well as do you use other people's voices? I know you said that like 60 of those tracks have lyrics in it. Is it primarily English, or do you have some that are outside of English?
Yeah, so I have some people that are coming in this year that are wanting to sing French and Spanish but we also have light language. So there's people that are doing that. And then if you listen, I have an album called A Shamanic Journey for the Modern World, Volume 1 and Volume 2 on our albums on the wellness series. And there's a lot of oohs and ahs and just different primal sounds that came through in the creation of that album. So it's everything from like toning, vocal toning and light language to even, Indian chants and kirtan. So there's a lot of different styles, but yeah, I love when I can find an artist that's on the same page as me vocally, and we can explore new music together. I love it. It's really fun.
That's awesome. Yeah. And so it was a question that I wanted to get to earlier. I'm just trying to think of some of the different categories of use of your music, because you mentioned yoga studios, and I figured like, wow, that I bet you, and I'm taking a stab at it here, but I bet you that is a big member client of yours are those who are in need of, they're not just making a video and putting one song in there, but they are leading hour to 90-minute yoga sessions. I would love to know some of the other reasons, or like, let's say, directions that people are coming to you from to use your music in these different ways. What are some of those categories?
Yeah. So there's more corporate clients that are coming to us now that are wanting to structure and create mindfulness programs for their employees. And so that's a huge development in this last 2 years. And it's something that we've created specifically and got very direct with our intentions to create a program and licensing that allowed companies to utilize our monthly albums and then be able to have it on their servers, listening at the workstations during the day. And then the employees have the ability to listen at home. And then basically giving them programs that give them templates and structures to be able to have challenges with meditation and to, really, get clear with that connection between joy and focus with their employees and the responsibility that the company has by creating an environment that helps to cultivate that. And so that's a big one. We're working with hypnotherapists, life coaches, people that are getting like very direct with music and meditation with the employees. And then also creating structures like massage therapists and energy workers where they're able to utilize the music in their sessions, but then be able to sell like, hey, if you someone's like, I love the music from today's session. It's like, oh, if you buy it from me, you're supporting the musician, but you're also supporting my practice as well. And so it's a way that they get a tool to listen to the music at home. And then, every time they come, there's something different to listen to. And it's creating more of that awareness for frequency-based music and on a ongoing daily basis,
My good friend Sean Foote just popped into the chat. Sean is a teacher up in the Tacoma area, and I've gone to his class before. He's doing something really beautiful. He's taken me into the class just to chat about filmmaking, being an artist, all those things, what I'm into. And he said music is great in the classroom. I'm curious if you've heard of anybody, teacher-wise, actually using your music in the classroom.
Yeah, there's an art teacher in South Carolina in the upstate. Her name is Amy, and she works at a high school. And she said that she started using my music on a personal level, bought the music, and then she became an affiliate. And so a member, and she started playing the music in her classroom. And she was joking with me. She said, I didn't ask permission from the school, but I just started playing the music in the background. And she said she started noticing that her classroom started like just becoming more calm, that people were talking less and that they were just more chill, and that when she stopped playing the music, the kids would raise their hand and say, can we turn the music back on? And she said, I just find it so fascinating that you just don't understand the difference that the music made in my class over a period of about 3 weeks of playing it in the background. And so I've seen this in a lot of things from working with hospice and the Humane Society. We were working with the Humane Society, and they were showing that they were taking, data from like heart rate. And then also the integration of like an animal that had PTSD was about 3 weeks to integrate it into general population. And they were saying about 3 to 4 days with the music on a constant basis that they were able to integrate the animals into general population, that within 5 to 8 minutes, it was lowering the dog's heart rate. And they were just, showing how effective the music was. And what I attribute this to is the same thing that I saw for me personally, which is tone. When I am creating my music, I call it the LTS method, which is basically I'm taking a low amplitude binaural beat, creating a mono beat, and this is the foundation, this tritone. It's not tritone in a musical term, but just the 3 frequencies are the foundation, and then the way that it's spatialized in the mixing, and then layering the music on top of that, with the instruments tuned and the focus being in line with what the focus of the frequencies are, and making those frequencies the lead singer in the band so that they're very prevalent and they create an overall mood that just really targets the stress response of the body. So you're targeting the heartbeat, the brainwave activity, the nervous system, and you're taking this music that's just creating a baseline of relaxation,
Mm-hmm. Dude, like it makes so much sense what you're talking about with the classroom. It makes so much sense what you're talking about with the animals. To me, it would make sense to be in hospitals as well. Like obviously only if the patient asks or wants it. Obviously it's a choice, but like they found, I forget what university did this, but they found that even fake plastic plants in the corner of the room lowered cortisol in patients. If there was no plants at all, cortisol was raised, and even fake plants caused it to lower. And this goes a step deeper. There's something about music. Just imagine, anyone listening here, just imagine, and here we are doing it, 3 people talking, not over one another, and it's, other than that, there's no music going on. Imagine just sitting in a chair in a room and having to do work. Right. And it's work that you could have music on in the back room that wouldn't distract. Now imagine putting that music on, and many of us have experience with this, how it helps lock you into a flow if it's the right music.
Right.
I would imagine that we're just scratching the surface with veterinarians, in schools, in hospitals. This is just scratching the surface of how impactful things like this are. Yeah. And I also like how you said using the spacing out. This is the interesting thing about EQing and mixing, is the way that you can space out sounds when there's a full composition. And we talked about biogeometry.
Yeah.
And for the audience, biogeometry is, it's such a deep, there's esoteric aspects to it, but understanding biogeometry is understanding shape and how shape introduces its own frequency. So like the form or the shape of a room that you're in. But biogeometry also has these symbols. And if you draw these symbols on the skin, or if you move your body almost like a dance in the form of these symbols, it has the same effect. And just to let the audience know that in biogeometry, I believe it was, help me, if I'm wrong, was it Sweden or Switzerland? There was a town in it was either Sweden or Switzerland. I think it might have been Switzerland, that Ibrahim Karim was brought into after 5G towers were put up, and he put basically just retrofitted the tower itself with biogeometry, and all the problems that the town was having went away. And so there's something about this, but we were talking about the way potentially with Dolby 5.1, if you can evolve the spacing of the mix, like where the things feel like they're at in your head, like low tones, in your head, if you're wearing headphones, it sounds like the tones are lower, and high frequencies sounds like they're up. Obviously, you pan it left, you pan it right, it has that effect. I'm just kind of spitballing here, but I really feel like there's a science that can be added to this art that eventually can make you feel like you're moving through this space. And I'm curious if you've worked with this before, moving the spatial mix over time in the song.
So I have worked with moving the mix, but not in the way that you're talking about. I think in the very specific like biogeometry, directional movement is fascinating, and I think it would be so amazing to communicate with those guys and work on something like that. It would just be really fun. But do you remember the animated movie Howl's Moving Castle? You guys remember that?
Oh yeah.
No.
Great. Yeah.
That's a Studio Ghibli, I think.
Yeah, totally. But one of the things I always remembered from that film was the wizard and how he would draw directions on the ground, and then he would like move. Like if he drew a line from top to bottom and then back to the middle and then to the left, he would step forward, step back, and then step to the left, and it would create a portal. And then he would like walk through it. And I just always found that so fascinating. And when I got into the biogeometry, like when Paul Check and Jason started talking to me about biogeometry, and I was looking at that and saw some of the stuff on Gaia, I was just blown away. I was like, man, this reminds me so much of Howl's Moving Castle. It was, just a really...
I have seen that one. My kids love, I mean, this which one is it on, HBO or something like that? All these movies, when Marnie was there, Arrietty, those are some really good things that I love my kids watching. If they're going to watch TV, I prefer that than some of the other. You notice some of the other ones, not to tangent too hard, but all the characters in the other shows, they're really whiny. They're kind of rude to one another. There's a lot of tension. But when it comes to these movies specifically, they're not all about the drama. It's, usually it's subtler. The conflict isn't beating you over the head with like hate versus hate.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is some of the best, because I'm just double checking here if this was Studio Ghibli or not. But you see a lot of, especially kids programming nowadays, has changed to where like a lot of like friends with kids are like, I only let my kids watch Paw Patrol. Like the rest seem like to give this kind of bad lessons like you're talking about. Ian, I've had a really curious thing, because you're kind of the perfect person to ask about this. Are you familiar with this huge new phenomenon called ASMR? And,
yes. Yeah.
And what are your thoughts? Because this whole thing, I remember first seeing it on Twitch when it first came out. They're using these unique singular, monodirectional type microphones, or that are just left, right. And then it's become this whole
paper or something.
It's become this very interesting whole field, because the science hasn't fully confirmed it yet. They're like, they're onto something here. There seems like this audio massage, but then there's this other whole component of it to where some people have kind of like sexualized it too. And it's like, now there's these lanes ASMR that are, some are more in the weird lane and some are just more like health. But first, your thoughts on that. Does it work, and how your music ties into that? And then also, I want to touch on both your guys' thoughts on this idea of like mental health artists, and the idea of like, how can we help with this whole mental health crisis with this type of music, and implementing it with, mental health artists, or all the areas we're talking about in public spaces being converted or used to pump, instead of angry news, maybe, this type of music through elevators, airports, public spaces. But first, ASMR.
Yeah. Are you asking Ben to go, or do you want me
this
to?
is all you go
for
it. Yeah.
Okay. So, I had a lot of friends when that was first coming out, and they were sending me, clips and saying, "What do you think about
shading
this?"
soap videos.
yeah. And I remember one girl specifically would like whisper, just like, really boring stuff, but it was like for people to sleep to. Yeah. And I remember like having conversations with my friend that sent all this stuff. And I was telling him, I said, there's different women that we would work with that would have these voices for meditation. And when they would start talking, I remember one of the girls we took to in Pittsburgh, and one of the yoga studios said, I'll hire you right now to do meditations. And it was because the way she talked was very like, okay, guys, we're going to have a meditation. Her flow, the way she talked was very peaceful and quiet. And it was very that genre, you know, of how she was presenting that. And I think that when you think about the frequency range that a lot of that stuff is hitting, it's either very low spectrum, like very bassy and very quiet, like low level bass, or it's a very high perspective, you know, like very high, like the crumbling of paper, or like different things that are like tweaking people's, and so for me, like frequency, the reason why I love doing what I'm doing is that we're taking like a bass frequency like 528, and then I'm taking like a mid octave and a bass octave, and that's where that kind of tritone is coming together. And I always put the bass in the center, and then kind of fan out the harmonics to the left and right, and then create this spatialized mix. And it's creating this balance. The bass for me is the home. Yeah, the home and the foundation, but it's also things that people feel. Like bass frequencies, when you play something at a lower frequency range, like a 25 to 45 hertz range, and you have like a subwoofer or something that really can produce these frequencies, people are like, oh yeah, that feels great. You know, they're like, they can feel it. And so it's a placebo. It's like they feel it, so they expect that it's working. If I played ranges of frequencies like 500 hertz and higher, you can hear it, but your body doesn't receive it the same way it does those lower vibrations. And so these two spectrums work on the body in very different ways. And so I feel like that that movement is creating these very specific targeted frequency focus. And for different people that connect with that, it's something that they are needing. And it's either in a form of relaxation or a form of release. And I think that there is the whole nother component with the sexualization of that, you know.
Yeah, they're trying to tickle you in weird ways. Yeah, but people tend to really respond like, oh, I love that with ASMR, or they're like, turn that off immediately, like extremely triggered by it. I'm like, huh.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I want to say this just real quick is with a lot of my tracks that I've had people reach out to me and they would criticize and say, some of your tracks are dark, and I'll smile and I'll say, they are kind of. And then they'll say, well, why is that? Why don't you make everything sound nice and fluffy? And I said, well, when you go to the gym, is everything nice and fluffy? And they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, you're tearing down muscle, you're breaking your body down and rebuilding a new body. And I said, so you want the beach body, but it doesn't just happen overnight, and it doesn't happen from doing all the really easy stuff at the gym. It comes from diet, nutrition, discipline, mindset, and then you're breaking down muscle and creating larger, more powerful pieces of your body, and it's not always fun. And so I said, there's this illusion in Western society that everything should be happy and peaceful and loving all the time, and we're humans, and that's absolutely impossible. Right.
That's the Disneyfication.
Yeah. And so I said, these tracks are needed. These tracks are needed, and to go into areas that are uncomfortable. And I said, anytime you talk about addiction and recovery, anytime you talk about someone that has been, like, let's say someone paired themselves with a narcissist and they went through years and years of abuse. For them to get better, it's not just going to be like flipping a switch and saying, hey, I'm going to be in love now. It's going to be going into these uncomfortable areas, getting real with yourself about the responsible side, like the parts that you were responsible for in staying in that environment. And then also the parts that you were responsible for in the harshness of that relationship. And so once you get through that, you're able to move into this new thing of like, okay, what do I want to manifest for myself now? And what vibration do I want to create for myself so that I'm attracting these new sides of life that I want to experience? And it's not all fun and games. Like there's some shit that you have to go through, you know, that's just uncomfortable. And I think that we have to have some songs in our catalog that are pushing people to go into the uncomfortable and to do some of the healing that's necessary. I mean, myself included, you know, with that. So,
yeah, you know, I mean, what you're talking about definitely sounds, I know a lot of people are probably not going to like this because words should stay in their lane. But this idea of where would shamanism have gone if we didn't just think of shamanism as being this old world phenomena? There's no such thing. The new world has just taken it over, and it's a dying cause. When you look at what shamans would do, it wasn't all about sitting down and serving everybody a psychedelic beverage. You know, those are newer, not that that didn't happen, but those are newer constructions of it. Usually a shaman would be the one to enter the different state. And only sometimes was it with a psychedelic. Sometimes it was tremoring, but a lot of the times it was by producing frequencies and sounds. And a lot of the times it was music and dance and performance. And they would use different instruments. They would use sounds from like shells and sticks to create frequencies. And they would use their own creative genius. So, I mean, the thing that I'm seeing is what you're doing with introducing astrology, introducing different frequencies with precision that you can do with technology these days in a way where you're also not separating yourself from it. You're not letting some algorithm do it. You're introducing your own humanness into it. And you're spending, you said towards the beginning, when you're tailoring some of this for a client, I'm not sure if that's the right word to use, but a member, working on it for like a year with somebody specific in mind. That to me is really interesting because doctors don't spend that much time with their patients, you know?
Yeah.
And really the term doctor in its root etymology means teacher, for one.
Yeah.
And nowadays it really is more of a pharmaceutical salesman. And I'm not putting anyone in allopathic medicine down, but if you really take a look at how much time is actually spent on an individual and really dialing this in, it sounds like you're ahead of the curve. Because if Selin Atasoy, and I mentioned her earlier, she said the future of music is really going to be, or I'm sorry, the future of medicine is vibrational. And we may, you know, find a time where specific frequencies are prescribed for individuals with specific maladies. So, I mean, I guess that's not much of a question, but what I'm seeing here is a carrying on of a tradition that is older than our literature, which is really using frequency, it's using music, and it's really tailoring it towards individuals who either want, you know, like to feel better because of some ailment, or to enhance an aspect of their life, you know, to reach, you know, another state of their own psyche, or different chambers of their own intelligence. So I guess, like, to wrap this all up, because, you know, this should be maybe the last question here, but what are some of the feedback that you're getting from people, like, not just on the side of like, hey, this really helped me with X, Y, Z, whatever pain, or whatever I'm dealing with, or it helped me in ways that I wasn't expecting. It brought me to this kind of state of mind, if you will. What's some of the feedback that you've been getting?
Well, one of the things I'll say that we didn't get into is I grew up dyslexic. I had a very hard time in the traditional learning model. Yeah, I had a really hard time. If I would read a book, I would have to read the page about 6 times to kind of try to take anything away from that page. And when I started working with this music in 2011, you know, it was a huge change within the first year. So we didn't get into that either. I was about 315 pounds in 2011. I had played sports my whole life. I went through this huge change and just went to a dark night of the soul. Long story short, I got diagnosed with mitral valve prolapse and a heart arrhythmia. And I had like college scouts and professional scouts looking at me. I was told I was going to play professional baseball my whole life, played baseball from T-ball to high school. And I was running around the bases one day and just blacked out, boom, hit, fell on the ground, went to the doctor. They, went out through all the things that they found and basically were saying, these aren't going to kill you, but when they work together, this can cause a loss of oxygen to the brain. And the scouts that I had left. And so that created this huge depression. I'd kind of detached from the world. I started eating food, drinking, partying, doing all the things of the dark night of the soul. And so that led me into this time period where I found myself overweight, out of shape, and just broken. And so moving forward, making the changes to make those changes, I started seeing I lost 100 pounds the first year, started changing my body in different ways, but the mind, the dyslexia started changing massively. Like I was able to read books and remember, I'd watch a movie and could remember the entire dialogue, could regurgitate it to people. It was just like massive change in my brain. The neural networks were creating these connections that were holding information, being able to retain the information. And so working with people in this last, 6 to 7 years in a company focus, what has been really neat is watching other people with dyslexia and autism having breakthroughs. One of the ones that really stands out to me is when I was in Charleston, there was a girl named, I won't use her name, but basically she was the daughter of one of my friends' friends, and they asked if I would work with her, and she was non-responsive. They would say her name and she would not respond. She wouldn't make eye contact. She was not in this traditional, school model. And so it took us about 3 months of using the music. It was introduced just by the phone, then it went into instruments, and then it was like, a speaker system, and it was something that was utilized daily before bed. Within that 3 months, she started making eye contact, the call and response, like saying her name and having her respond. I still remember the first time that the mom called and told her it was dinner, and the daughter turned and said, "Okay, mommy," and her mom like collapsed and was like in tears. And you see like this play out in multiple scenarios. I had a woman in Australia send us a video testimonial saying that her son had been bedridden his whole life. He was 10 years old, constant immune problems and respiratory issues. And she was saying that within an hour of listening to the music, it had huge, breakthroughs with him. But when they started going to 2 and 3 hours of our pain relief album on a daily basis, that he started setting up and started responding with his inhaler, that it was actually having the benefits that it was supposed to. He started getting out of bed, running around, playing, that he had more energy, started eating more. And she was saying, the only thing that changed was this album on a 2 to 3 hour basis every day. And she was, did this huge testimonial for us saying like how much it changed their lives. And so those are the things that made it easier to start putting huge amounts of time. Like so you were asking, how long do you spend making these albums? And my answer between creating custom tracks for private clients and then creating these monthly albums is I'm probably in the studio about 20 to 22 days out of the month, like creating, music like 6 to 8 hours a day most of the time. And so it's just been huge. Like, and the other thing that I want to say is like, people are always like, man, I listened to this track and it just, it wrecked me. All this stuff came out of me. And then the next day I felt great. And so I was thinking, like, man, guys, I'm listening to the music before I go to sleep, but I'm also listening to this music like 6, 8 hours a day, like mixing, mastering, like creating. And, I was like, there was a time where I was like crying all the time. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, why, why am I having all this release? And then one of my friends is like, dude, you're listening to that music like 24/7. And I was like, so I had to start making space in my life for silence, because most people have to train themselves into getting into the music. And I was getting to a point where I was like forgetting that I needed some break and space between some of the work. And so as you find more balance with that, it becomes more powerful, and you see the benefits of both. It's really interesting.
Dude, that's amazing. And I appreciate that you went into that detail. You definitely, you struck deep when you were speaking about autism. The interesting thing I found in Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory book is that speaking in prosodic voice, which is really just like an up and down rather than like a monotone or rigid voice, it's kind of speaking a bit more poetically, if you will, but the tone of the voice actually calms the nervous system down of those with autism and causes them to stop showing so much of the symptoms and actually kind of tune into that same frequency. So that's really incredible. And dude, I love what you're doing here. And I know you and I talked about collaborating at some point. I think that's something we definitely got to do, whether we do that remotely or I come out your way. But I definitely see, a big value in that. And, honestly, I can say that I want to wrap my mind more around the model that you're working with for licensing, because I definitely think that it's refreshing to hear that you're also digging into what's happening on a systemic level, and how is this keeping musicians from even being able to venture into making their own music and spending more time on it, and not having to just run the rat race, as I think Jeffrey Cummins said in the chat, that most musicians today, just to make any money, they're glorified t-shirt salesmen. They're selling vinyls. They have to be on the road nonstop. Very hard to have a family. I remember that. That's the main reason why I don't fancy ever going on tour again as a profession. I would do it here and there. But it's a tough life. So I just have to say, like, I really appreciate it. I know that the audience is really, in the chat, they're basically saying this was really on point. It's very refreshing, and it's also eye-opening to see that there's more that can be done than just making frequency-based music. Like you're touching many different tentacles inside the music industry, and also what music is even outside the industry. So I really appreciate that. I guess to leave the audience with in this respect, let them know how they can engage with you and what you suggest as far as not just the website to go to, but how to engage with this deeper, because most people would just say, well, find me on Spotify. So let the audience know how they can engage with what you're doing.
Okay. So the first way is you can buy albums. We have some albums on Bandcamp. If you go to listening to smile, the number 1, listeningtosmile1.bandcamp.com, that takes you to the wellness series. Those are all available for private use. You can purchase that and use it at home. If someone wants to work with the music in a commercial setting or with their business, they can go to listeningtosmile.com, and at the top of the page, there's services, and there is a meditation affiliate. And when they click on that link, it gives them more information, some videos, and then there's a sign-up form at the bottom, and they can fill out the application to become a member and to utilize the music in that commercial space. And then we basically give them orientation, help train them to utilize and monetize the music so that they can grow that value in their business. And then the other way is there is a thing that we call personal frequency coaching, which is basically people who are really interested in sound healing but don't have a lot of knowledge on it. And basically we offer coaching, which will it's a 45-minute Zoom call. It answers questions about sound healing, about ways to utilize this on a daily basis. It gives them a template for 2 weeks to work with the music. They get their own customized sound playlist that they're able to utilize. And then it's just something that gives them a template that they can utilize for months, if not years, with those tracks. And then from that point forward, they can just buy some other albums and work with it. And it's something they can do with headphones at home. So listeningtosmile.com is the website. We are going through a rebranding, new logo, new website, probably in the next week and a half. It'll be up. I'm super excited to share that with everyone. It's really, really cool. So yeah.
Amazing.
And we'll have that all in the description as well.
Yeah, we'll have all that info below. This has been incredible, dude. Ian, I'm glad that we finally connected. I know there was a time there where we were trying to connect, and then it came back through a different friend. So I'm really glad it happened. This was really enlightening on a bunch of topics, but very, very poignant, and also something that, like, right now in human history, with just the influx of information and media that we consume, to have something like this, I feel like it could help streamline where people are at, not just as background tones, but as you said, a lot of people, they're just constantly listening to podcasts and news and stuff like that. And to break free from that monotony, just to be able to integrate what you're doing to yourself most of the day is such a powerful tool. So I just have to say thank you so much, not just for coming on the program, but for what you're doing and what you're dedicating so much of your time towards.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'm just blessed, man. Like, to be truly honest, like, there's so many musicians who say, man, you're so lucky. And I'll start laughing and I'll say, I don't know if it's luck, man. There was a lot of sacrifice to get to this point, but I'm truly so thankful for being able to do what I do for a living and being able to make a living doing what I'm doing with music. You know, I know how blessed it is because I know how much of a struggle it is right now in the world to be a musician. And so I want to do as much as I can in helping other musicians and bringing them into the spotlight, as well as teaching them what I've learned. And so that's something in the next year that we've started proposing, is putting together a course for musicians to teach them how to move their music into a more frequency-minded mode, and then also creating their own personal structure for licensing to break away from the tech and streaming sites and the record industry and create their own community that is actually lucrative to them, you know.
Amazing. Walt Morse and many others in the chats are saying thank you, sending a lot of gratitude for everything that you've shared with us today. And with that, that'll conclude the podcast for today. Ladies and gentlemen, music is near and dear to my heart. You know that. I've said it many times, but I started out as a filmmaker, and really my favorite part of, or I started out as a musician, and really my favorite part of filmmaking is the music and the sound design and the way that the ears listen while the eyes are entertained. And I really appreciate this podcast because it shows that there is a depth to what your ears are doing all the time, that a lot of the times the eyes take, precedent over, and a lot of the credit for, a lot of the conscious mind. So definitely pay attention to the noise that you have around you and how you respond to it, and craft your environment around that. That's really what Ian is doing there, is helping you craft your environment. And with that being said, these are the kinds of podcasts that I want to have a lot more often, are really practical ways that you can craft your environment. Because if you know that a psychedelic is really only as good as the set and setting that you put yourself in, then you realize that a psychedelic is only amplifying normal life anyway. So if you start getting anxious, if you take a psychedelic and your normal environment is making you anxious, imagine what it's doing on a subconscious level all the time. Please go and check out what Ian Morris is doing with Listen to Smile. I think it's truly revolutionary, and we're definitely going to have him back on this podcast. With that being said, thank you all for coming every single Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern. We are here live doing this for all of you to bring you this much needed information. And with that being said, I'll catch you all next time on the Ben Stewart Podcast.